listening to Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
What a weekend it's been.
Oh, yeah? Something happened?
Yeah, something unavoidable. But I mean, before we get into that, of course, just before we started recording, folks, I was telling Nora that there was something I knew I wanted to talk about before Saturday happened. And I couldn't remember. Well, now I remember. And I'm just going to mention it a little bit. I know that you still use Twitter, like, a lot. I don't know what's happened in the last 2 weeks, but it has become like insufferable for me. Like, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but it feels like a full propaganda shift has happened. And
really,
yeah. On mine in particular, like the For You page stuff. Like, first of all, I despite having said many times not interested, anything that Elon Musk tweets comes up in my For You page. And it's like,
oh my God,
shuttled to it's as though the fact that I said that I don't want to see it makes it more in my shit. And there's just so much propaganda that either doesn't make any sense or that isn't real. Like a lot of people pretending to be black, for sure, too. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I think I might not even be able to check it anymore. Like, I think I might be done completely because it's just a fully unusable propaganda machine now for me. I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing or if I'm just the target for this kind of stuff.
That's a good question. Well, it's also kind of like, maybe you're the target, maybe because you're not using it very much, it gets swept into trying to kick up your engagement by giving you total shit. Because I'm using it so often that I don't know. I don't know obviously how those decisions are being made. I haven't seen a similar shift. I do not look at my For You tab ever, so I have no idea what's there. But
maybe that's the secret.
Yes, that's really key. That's really key. And I don't know, I have been finding that on Facebook, it has become completely unusable, where I'm just getting post after post after post of cartoons.
Cartoons?
Nothing but cartoons. Cartoons in different languages, cartoons that don't make any sense, cartoons that do make sense that aren't funny. Sometimes it's okay, that's kind of funny. Cartoons. And then tons of videos on making clothes and making candles and making stuff. It's so weird. I'll see one post from someone I know and then 30 posts that are either cartoons or short videos of stuff I have absolutely no interest in, that I've never demonstrated interest in. And I am finding Facebook just so unusable. And I'm only there because there are lots of groups that I follow that are still really active on Facebook. But even that is just so polluted by cartoons.
That's really interesting, because I would say I check Facebook once every 2 weeks at this point. I barely ever open the app. And oddly enough, it seems more usable than it did 6 months ago. now that I never use it, there's most of it is links from family and friends. Whereas I feel 6 months ago when I was okay, I'm done with this, it was just all ads, it felt like. Which brings me to another issue with Twitter, is that there are so many ads from conservative, new conservative news, online news sources, or news-ish sources, propaganda sources, I guess. And they make the ads seem like news articles. It's like the online equivalent of the this is a sponsored content that you might see in the Globe and Mail or something like that. And there's so much of it, and it's just reading the headline will tell you, it would be something as an example of how scientists actually discover that the Earth is cooling. like, what is this? Oh, it's an ad. It's not actual news. What's going on here? Yeah, very bizarre.
That's super weird because I'm not getting that. My ads are actually few and far between on Facebook. They're all very strange. Like this ad that I get all the time, which is the Men's League Sweaters custom hockey jersey ad. I get that all the time. All the time. It has figured out that I play sports and that I might be in the market for customized sports apparel, regalia, whatever. Anyway, this is all irritating. I mean, social media sucks. It sucks so much. I really do hate it, but here we are.
Yeah, and it's just come into sharp focus in the last couple of weeks, especially with everything that's going on in the world, how great it was for a time to be able to like actually have discussions about current events or international events online that you wouldn't necessarily see in the news, and that would actually influence the way that the news was talking about those issues, because, you know, of course, journalists were all over these types of social media platforms, seeing how people were discussing things. And while that was in ways annoying in like the BuzzFeed listicle style, it was cool to be able to have a different type of take and see that influence the way the media would talk about it. And now, God, it's just, well, actually, I think that leads us to our main topic in a little bit, because I think the way that social media is now set up has deeply impacted how Saturday is being talked about. But I get ahead of myself there. Before we get into all of the bad, why don't we start with some good? Do we have any gratitude to give out?
Yeah. This week we've got a lot of gratitude to give out. So thank you so much to everybody who has been sharing the podcasts, making sure people know about Sandy and Nora. Thanks for your patience as I create out this new feed for the daily news. I'm realizing that it is hard to find, and so I'm doing my best to increase the visibility on that. And because the Real News Network also syndicates that podcast, you'll find the Real News Network's version of it pretty quickly on Apple Podcasts, which is good. You should listen to the Real News, but if you have a choice, you should listen to us directly. But anyway, thank you so much to you folks and to everyone who donates, because you guys make it possible. And so this week, thanks especially to Jean-Philippe, Autumn, and Marie, Nathaniel, Brigitte, and Nina. Thank you all so much for your support.
Thank you so much. So, Nora, what happened on Saturday?
Well, okay, actually, can we talk about BC first?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, and maybe this is the way that we can do this is, and I actually have a couple of things that I want to say, because going back to the social media thing, it did feel like old time Twitter was back after Donald Trump got shot in the ear on social media. Like it was back to being kind of fun online. Although there were a lot of people.
Oh God, not on on
is that right?
For you feed. Oh God, no, it was terrible.
Oh,
it was like being in the pits of hell.
Why?
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, again, like I'm on the For You page. Like that's what it comes up automatically when I open Twitter. So I have to actively switch over.
Yeah, you have to keep going to following. Yeah, it'll change eventually, but you have to keep doing it.
I keep forgetting to do it. So I keep, every once in a while I do it, and then I forget that I haven't done it, and I'm like, what is all of this stuff? But yeah, it was awful. It really sucked.
But like, what did you see? Like, what was it like?
Oh, just like, again, being in like the mirror world of stuff that doesn't make any sense. Lots and lots of discussions about how this was the liberals' fault, that liberals did this, that initially like conversation about how it was probably a Black person who did it. Like all sorts of really weird, super conservative stuff. And then when it became clearer what had happened, just lots of support, a lot of people who were saying, I used to be a liberal, but now after today, I'm coming out as with my support for Donald Trump, like a real man, real masculine guy. Like people saying, you know, I cried in 2016 when he was elected, but now I realize as of today, like some of these accounts, I'm sure are not real people.
Of course.
I would say a good 60% of the posts that I was seeing were people saying that I have switched my political affiliation to support Donald Trump.
Okay, wow. That's pretty amazing because all I saw were like the standard jokes. The things that I was most irritated by were the comments coming from people being like, be careful, don't get yourself fired by what you're going to say about this. And all those kinds of like pearl clutching kind of warnings. But no, it felt...
I maybe saw one or two of those, but like just to give you an example of how ridiculous some of the stuff in my feed is, it's like people saying that the Secret Service agents were DEI hires, and that's obvious because look how many women there are, and women don't have the Constitution to be able to do security work, and DEI caused this attempted assassination.
Okay. Random bot farm pushing that message out. Yeah, like so.
Yeah, and I would say that there was a bunch of those. Okay, like not a small amount.
So you see very clearly there the goal of Elon Musk's Twitter to constantly use everything to push people towards the right and show people that a natural response to something like this is to actually radicalize around the far right, even though it was a Trump supporting libertarian who shot the guy's ear. Okay, so let's back up. The other motif on social media this past weekend was the I stand in solidarity with Donald Trump posts. And I want to use this to be able to first talk about British Columbia, and then we will talk about Donald Trump. So I don't know. Did you see these posts, Sandy? The Social Democrats standing with Trump, saying there's no place for political violence?
Yeah, totally. I mean, not only was that all over social media, I feel like that is the standard official big P politics line from, Trudeau to Jagmeet Singh all the way down. If not like I stand with some sort of rhetoric that is similar.
Yeah. So one of those posts comes from the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby. And I have been asked by someone, by a listener, to have a quick chat about what is going on in BC. So the provincial government, of course, is an NDP government, and they've been in power now for a while, and there's an election coming in the fall. And very surprisingly to people who have any level of memory, the BC Conservatives are surging in the polls. Now, you might listen to that and hear, oh, the Conservatives are surging in the polls like everywhere else in Canada. That might be worrisome, but it's not surprising. Or you might be hearing that and go, wait a minute, I thought that the BC Conservative Party was like a fringe freak show. And how on earth could they be?
That was my... That was my reaction. Sorry, is there a Conservative party in BC that anybody respects? Isn't that the Liberals? What's going on there?
Yeah, so the Conservatives have been the party that has figured out how to be the opposition to the NDP. And it's very, very bad. There's an article from Katie DeRosa at CBC that's looking at the fundraising outcomes for the four parties in that province. And unsurprisingly, of course, the NDP is on top. They're the ones in power, and they've raised $2.2 million. But the BC Conservatives are very much on an upswing. If you look at the charts, they've raised $1.1 million, so like half of what the NDP has raised. But to give you an idea of where they were last quarter four, where the NDP raised $1.8 million. At the end of quarter four, 2023, the BC Conservatives had barely reached $300,000. So it is a pretty significant increase. And people are shifting to the Conservatives as an option. And so the way that it's written in this article is the Conservatives have leapfrogged the official opposition BC United in terms of donations. It's very scary. And one of the ways that they've been able to do this is they're really focusing on healthcare collapse. Right? Which is not too surprising. Now, we've got the BC former Green Party leader, Andrew Weaver. He thinks that the BC Conservatives will win. He told the CBC. That's probably not the case. I suspect that the NDP will still actually squeak out a victory. But it's an interesting kind of example of what happens when you have a social democratic party in power, but the really core issues in society are not being taken care of. And so for one example that was on the Daily News last week, in the interior, there were 2 hospitals that had to close during heat waves because there was a shortage of staff because the staff were out on sick. And the NDP had to walk this line saying, of course people should take a day off when they're sick. Of course you should go home when you're sick. The result is there's not enough slack in the system to actually stay open. And the NDP, being the party in power, has not thrown the kind of money and support and resources to the healthcare system that is required. And so they find themselves in this catch-22 where people are going to be reasonably frustrated with the NDP and looking for alternatives. And if the BC fucking Conservatives have managed to look like a reasonable alternative, with, of course, some help from a surging federal party, that's pretty bad news.
That is very bad news. Wow. It's not looking good for the elections upcoming across the country.
No, not at all. And I think that people are right to be looking at this and saying, what are the forces here? What's happening here? And actually last week's episode talked a lot about that, how the establishment, the center cannot hold. And so whether that center is being occupied by the Liberals, whether it's being occupied by the NDP, or whether it's being occupied by a Conservative party that's like, maybe less to the far right, as we've seen in most Conservative parties in Canada, that cannot hold. You have to actually do something radical. And if you are a progressive party, that radical thing has to be, fixing healthcare and maybe not spending any money on policing Indigenous people who are just trying to defend their land. I don't know.
How is that radical?
I'm sorry. It's like radical compared to the center.
I mean, that should fucking be the center. Making sure healthcare is caring for one's health. Like, I don't know, Nora. I don't know.
I know. It's very bad. But, Eby was out there saying that he abhors political violence, of course. I mean, let's not talk about the political violence that's wrought on people who use drugs in public. And he stands with those people who are saying that Trump, it's good that he's not dead.
Oh, my God, Nora. Okay. So on Saturday, if you had not seen, there was an assassination attempt on former U.S. President Donald Trump's life at a campaign rally. And let's start with that, actually, the rhetoric about political violence. Weird, right? It's weird because, I mean, in like the not too distant history, there's been multiple attempts on political assassinations in the United States, attempts and successful attempts in terms of political assassinations. And the discussion on this is as though this is like really, really strange, really, really odd. And then also like this discussion of there's no place for violence in politics. It's just like a massive head scratcher given everything that's happened ever in American politics. I just like very confusing rhetoric. And I think a couple things are happening. One is that I think, a lot of that rhetoric is coming from center and center left places. Like this sort of consensus around how we will discuss this is to say there is no place for political violence and whatever. I think part of that is that people are terrified right now about political polarization and what that is going to mean for all of our lives in the very near future, as folks are staring down what looks like it could be a rapidly approaching civil war of some sort. And I think that people are looking at this situation and feeling like, how do we, what do we do to turn down the heat and make it so that this is unacceptable? And then, put out these statements that anyone who has been paying attention to how much weaponry and war has been sent overseas or used in the last fucking year or ever, really, it just like, it's completely inconsistent. It makes no sense to be like, there is no place for violence in politics. Anyone who remembers January 6th knows that that's like a bold, that was not the response after that. And that was like a violent insurrection in which multiple people died. And so it's weird to use a moment like this that seems to be the next iteration of something that is coming to try to assuage people's fears by saying something that is so wildly out of touch and so untrue. And I'm not sure what it helps or who it helps. Like, who's the language for? Like, what is it trying to accomplish? Because I'll tell you what, the people who are most likely to be being violent and taking up arms are, the people who did it in this case. And it's the folks who are standing with Donald Trump. And in fact, the legitimate, quote unquote, politician that is most likely to use such incendiary language is Donald Trump himself. And so it's like, what is everybody doing instead of pointing to how that his language has led us to this moment, and his rhetoric has led us to this moment, his strategy has led us to this moment, pretending that things are just not as they are? It's just so, I guess, par for the course. We've been pretending that Biden is like a fully functional man as well. So who knows, right?
Right. Well, how's this for a headline from the Toronto Star today? Thank goodness Donald Trump survived. Now let's get back to defending democracy.
I promise you that won't age well.
It's not even a couple of hours old, and it's not aged well, I would say.
Yeah. Oh my God.
This is the contradiction in this situation, which is that actually assassinating Donald Trump would neutralize a part of the threat that is facing democracy in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that I wanted to see his head explode on camera. That is not something that I want to see. I don't want to see anybody's head explode on camera. I'm too squeamish for that. That's not something I don't watch movies where that happens. Like, that's not my thing. But if we're talking about the uses of political violence here, and Trump is whipping up right-wing, probably disenfranchised, frustrated white men, and then they come and shoot him, that's called fucking around and finding out. Like, that's literally just the natural thing that happens as a result of the kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump has created. And we can condemn the rhetoric, but the act is not separate from that rhetoric. And there's not much point in trying to be like, okay, well, Donald Trump is an asshole, but I'm super glad he didn't die by his own actions. It's like, no, this is what he has created. And so if people are worried about increased violence on the campaign trail, which I think, you've said this, and I think that is what a lot of people are driven by, then you can say that. But it isn't as if you see Donald Trump get assassinated or almost assassinated and think, oh my God, I personally am not going to be safe at the next time that I go to a fucking Democratic rally or something. It's like you live in a tinderbox full of guns. Like your level of safety hasn't changed. Like it's probably already been not super safe. But the threat to democracy is in part like these lies that we tell ourselves, right? Like violence has no place in democracy is so hilarious because violence has always been present in Western democracy. Like our democracies are literally built on top of violence and through violence. Like, we send military personnel and weaponry into areas where Indigenous people are trying to stop gas and oil exploration because the political project that governs North America is violence. That's what it is. It keeps us in line. It's violence. It's a repressive police state, which is continuing to grow. Talking about getting Canada's fucking contributions to NATO to 2%, that's violence. That's not just random money to the military. That is to give people guns to go and be violent outside of the borders of Canada and also inside of the borders of Canada. So, like, you know, there's this really irritating fucking trend right now to completely erase context from everything. And partly that's this whole like, oh my God, a political assassination in the United States. Can you believe it? It's like, yeah, I can believe it. It's fucking not new, actually. But it also tries to sanitize this whole question of how violent these systems truly are. And so when we see the violence in a very specific way, because we're so able to ignore the violence that happens in the prison system and the violence that happens on the streets and the violence that happens among people who use drugs and the violence that happens among families that are being over-policed and harassed and abused by child services. If we're going to ignore all of that violence to say nothing about the foreign affairs violence that we are regularly implicated in, then I guess we're going to look at Donald Trump and go, oh my God, that guy, his ear got nicked. Man, I got to condemn that violence. It's like, that is the system, folks. That's the fucking system. That is the system. And the only bad news out of this is that this gives Trump a tremendous boost, as everyone has already identified and is very worried about.
Yeah, there's also been like this weird, again, like mirror worlds fucking rhetoric, especially on the right, that is trying to place this as a natural outgrowth of like violent rhetoric from the left,
right?
Which is like,
right.
Which is so much of what the propaganda on my Twitter feed is right now, that it's just like really making my brain hurt. There's an article in CBC News right now where the headline is referring to Danielle Smith. Alberta Premier calls on progressive politicians to dial down rhetoric after attack on Trump. And specifically, she's saying, you know, the people are calling Poilievre dangerous. And that's the sort of thing that leads to what happened to Trump. And it's just like, whoa.
Is that?
Whoa. You know, fucking conservatives are really, really good at right away coming up with a propagandist, like fucking nonsensical message box that totally serves their purposes and doesn't need to make sense at all. And the fucking news will just parrot it, so it's fine for them. The news just puts that out without saying, like, this is outrageous. The word dangerous, it's like, is being used to say, like, this is how what happened to Trump happened, and not like Trump literally calling for deportations, for people to be thrown in jail, for political violence to be used against everyone from immigrants to his political opponents, like telling people to take up arms. Like, sorry, that's their rhetoric. Like, I don't saying that Poilievre is dangerous. Like, I mean, his policies are dangerous. Like, what else do you call them? How else do you use them? And it's like that sort of rhetoric versus this this liberal centrist desire and anxiety to appear like, oh, we are elevated above, you know? And and that is why we say there is no place for political violence, even as we know that political violence is the way in which the governments of the West maintain power. Like, it's just like nothing makes sense. Literally nothing makes sense.
Well, and Danielle Smith's a great example too, because, she has been pushing this idea of getting rid of safe supply, which saves lives, and instead forcing people against their will into treatment centers that, statistically speaking, we know do not actually help people who might have an addiction to drugs. And so we can talk about her like literal policies being violent, or we could talk about how she supported the fucking border blockade at Coots, which was pretty also violent, where there were guns and these guys were like holding down a border crossing. Like it's a joke. But, the article that you referenced, I imagine, is one by Catherine Tunney, who's one of CBC News's most senior journalists. And this is what she pulled out as an example of Smith and her aggressive language, is what she says. Okay. So Danielle Smith was making comments about Environment Minister Steve Guilbeault, and this is what she said, quote, "He's an environmental zealot. He happens to be our environment minister federally. He believes that he has the expertise and knowledge to tell us in Alberta how to run our power grid." That's it. That's what Catherine Tunney is telling readers in the CBC is Danielle Smith's version of aggressive political rhetoric.
Oh my God.
And so she jumps over the actual aggressive political rhetoric, the actual violence that Danielle Smith actually very literally, very specifically is doling out literally as you are listening to this fucking podcast, and instead talks about how she thinks that Stephen Guilbeault is a zealot on the environment. And it's like, she can say that. The guy worked for Greenpeace. I mean, of course, Danielle Smith thinks that.
Oh, man. Nora, we are cooked. Like, if going back to what I was mentioning before, in a time when the internet, social media was less Elon Musk's fantasy world, and more having discussions that perhaps folks in the news were not having, I just feel like this moment would be very, very different. But in a world where our social media is really closely curated to lean in a political direction, you get these articles that make no sense and that should be written differently. Like I don't understand why I'm just reading this stuff that makes no sense without any sort of like news analysis that gives me a sense of why it doesn't make any sense. Like why hasn't anyone placed alongside this discussion of how there's no room for violence in politics, Trump's violence? Like it should be right alongside what people are saying, or saying at the very least, that's the least. What would be the most helpful is, of course, contextualizing how politics is inherently violent. It's really, really bizarre to have, but it's really, really bizarre to have lived in a moment of like the 2010s where things that are like perhaps obvious from the political vantage point and principles of the left, you could see that get imbued in mainstream media. And now, now being in this place where things that don't make sense are now given legitimacy. Once again, a type of reporting on fascism and Donald Trump that is going to lead to his victory in a way that is worse than 2016, and that I know that many journalists and media outlets were looking at themselves like, God, what did we do? Did we do this wrong?
Right.
And the answer was yes. It's like, here it is again. Like, why has nothing been learned?
Well, there's no space for it, right? Like, you know, if you think of where we were in Canada a decade ago in media, and things weren't great for sure. Like, you know, we were looking a decade earlier at how much better they were, but there was still a diversity of opinion. There was still a bit of critical opinion allowed in reporting. And as you say, the interplay between a freer social media world and journalists and journalism was still intact. And so if you had a situation like the G20 in Toronto and you have journalists on the street and you have activists like tweeting and talking and running into people and explaining all of the things that they're seeing, that the state program of this violent crackdown that we experienced in the streets of Toronto in 2010 was harder to maintain, right? Think about, for anybody that wasn't there, you think about that Saturday afternoon rally. Okay, so you had 30,000 people, 35,000 people marching down University Avenue in Toronto and marching towards the perimeter of the security zone. And if you were prepared to have a confrontation with the police, you went south. And if you were not prepared to have a confrontation with police, you went west, I think. No, east. You went east, whatever. And in that moment, when you had the chaos erupt on Queen Street, where the police, there was questionable, did the police set their own cop cars on fire? Did they allow for people to riot so that they had maximum proof for the cameras and how destructive activists were so that they could crack our heads later that day? And then on Sunday, the answer was yes. We all saw that in the streets. We could see what the police were doing, that they were allowing things to get as completely bonkers as possible so that they can make that argument to then crack our heads later on that day. However, the more free world of social media and the fact that there were more journalists and more eyes on the ground and more people who were seeing what the activists were seeing allowed for that whole state project of allowing and therefore completely overblowing the quote unquote violence, the window smashing and whatever from the activists. It didn't get the same play that it would have had if that happened now. Because now there aren't as many critical voices in the press. There aren't as many people in general in the press. And the official line from the government is so much harder to break through because they've kicked us all out. All of us who do that work, we're not allowed to write in any of these fucking papers anymore. And so you get, thank God that Donald Trump is alive. Now let's save democracy. Are you fucked? Are you fucking stupid? Like, do you fucking know how this works? No, you do not. But these are the fucking kinds of messages that break it through the censors. And so that's the fundamental problem here. And we see it on full display in this idea that you can remove violence from fucking politics. Are you kidding me? What is that? What is politics without violence? That's fucking socialism, actually, which we can't even get kind of close to in this country because of the violence.
And the rhetoric. Wow. You know what's fascinating? It's like America had a whole revolution just to be Europe.
Amazing, eh? Amazing. Well, I also just found out how related the presidents have all been to each other. And it's like, whoa, you folks have a fucking monarchy down there.
Oh, is that a thing? Are they like fully familial relations? Oh, it makes sense. Gosh, I think, this, I imagine when we look back on this era, well, maybe we won't because we're never honest with each other and history doesn't exist. But there's a chance that we look back on this era in 10 years, should we all survive, and think to ourselves, wow, we really just pumped up the democracy rhetoric just so that we could usher in a period of deep, deep fascism, death and destruction. Why did we do that? I hope that somehow we can change the tide, shift the bearing on the ship, and make it so that we don't use the idea of democracy, these ideas that we're living in a world that we are simply not living in order to justify fascism. Because at the end of the day, that's what's happening. And it's really weird and hard to figure out how to discuss a thing that makes no sense. But here we are in a place that makes no sense, where people are doing their darndest to defend the ability for fascists to be fascists and to take their shot at ruling us all. So here we are. What a world. 2024.
But it's important to like understand how these things are manufactured, right? Like when you think of someone like Noam Chomsky, who's been writing about the manufacture of consent for decades, like we are now living in exactly the ideal situation for that consent to be manufactured, because there's just no way for us to cut through this stuff. Like we're so fucked. We're so fucked. It's like, I mean, it's
Is there any other way to say it?
I mean, it's so bad, right? It's like, I mean, you go over to the Globe and Mail and their top opinion piece from the editorial board is NATO gets lost in the fog of Justin Trudeau's rhetoric. What does that even mean? You know, there was a opinion piece in the Toronto Star this past week that the future of Canada and our defense and security lies in NATO, and if we don't invest in our military, then we are fucked. It's like, can we have an adult please explain what in the fuck these people imagine our military is going to be doing? Like, the United States is in total collapse. They're going to bring Canada down with it. And thank God we've invested in a military to do what exactly? Fend off Russia? Russia's going to come and invade us? No. The United States poses the biggest threat to Canada. It's an existential threat. Is it a direct threat? We have absolutely no way of influencing this threat. We have absolutely no way of pacifying this threat. And here we are putting all of our money in the Canadian military to be 100% locked arms with the United States as they are in very clear and obvious decline. It's like the United States is Biden. The world is going, Canada, the guy is close to death. Don't put him in the driver's seat of your rocket ship. And Canada's like, shut up, man. This guy's been driving rockets for 100 years. He knows what he's doing. And we're just ready to go up into space. Like, it's, you know, we can say that doesn't make any sense, but on the other hand, it's like, it's enragingly stupid. And that is where we're supposed to be, because this is the intent, is that we feel so powerless and so frustrated by how stupid everything is that we just completely check out and we ignore it, because you cannot live with this level of stupidity. But we have to, because that's our reality. And I mean, the people who have power are working very hard and spending a fuck of a lot of money to make sure that any independent institution that used to provide any of this kind of understanding and service and knowledge and research is not going to work. And guess what? That is called fascism, as you say. And we will have never been able to say that democracy that everyone talks about so much was able to save us.
Well, Nora, there's one thing we can look forward to. Since there's no place for violence in our politics, I suppose that means that it will be the end of the police soon. and all sorts of things that we've been calling for the end of. I mean, we can rattle off a list, but I'm not going to. You can all imagine it. It's all going to end. So we win in the end. I mean, if we're all saying things that don't make any sense, I'm going to say things that don't make any sense too.
You can't fight fire with fire, Sandy.
Oh, Nora, this is nonsense world. Aren't you following? Yes, you can. Fire puts out fire. This is the world in which we live.